Hey there, I'm Tim,
I'm Keegan.
and you're listening to That Reminds Me.
This is a show where we'll segue into whatever the hell we want.
That's right. Today, we're talking about desserts. Just any dessert we can think of, whether it's popular desserts here in America or from around the world or whatever we feel like talking about. So, while we're on the topic, we'll start off strong with something that most people around the world enjoy cake.
Do you like cake?
I do like cake, yes.
I've never been super partial to cake. I don't know why. It's just never really sat well with me.
A lot of people think cake is usually pretty dry, which a lot of cakes are, but if you have a good cake, it's moist, so that offsets it a lot.
It's not even a moisture thing. I think just there's so many flavors, but they're all too sweet. I don't do well with sweet foods. I can't eat them in super large capacities because my teeth and my mouth just don't agree with shoveling that amount of sugar in my mouth. I gotta offset it with something bitter or salty or whatever.
That makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of people, I at least know several people myself personally, that usually when they eat something, they kind of have to offset it with something else. Like, there's a meme on the internet about, like, me eat something sweet. All right, now I gotta eat something salty. Eat something salty. All right, now I gotta eat something sweet. And just keeps going back and forth like that because they have to keep offsetting the flavor.
I see. With cakes, it's like vanilla, chocolate, you have, what is it, red velvet. There's so many cakes, but they're all of the sweet variety. Is that just a common thing with desserts overall, that they just have to be sweet? Because I've seen so many desserts that are like chips. They're not a dessert per se, but they're not sweet. They're savory or they're salty, or some of them are even bitter if you get like salt and vinegar chips. So, what is it about a dessert that makes us want sweet?
I'm not really too sure. I guess it's sort of that most desserts are just kind of sweet to begin with because I don't know much about it, but I would guess when we cultivated sugar, it just kind of became a thing that we put into a lot of stuff, and we found that it works best when put in breads, like pastry type stuff. So most desserts are pastry based, so therefore they would be sweet.
Right. It's just, I don't know, because in the old days, when people had a more full palate, when you would eat like fruits and vegetables and meat, like all for one meal, it's not as though sweet was missing from your palate. These days, when your standard dinner is macaroni and cheese or chicken tenders or just stuff that isn't sweet, it's processed food. It makes more sense for your reward, your dessert at the end of it, to be sweet. It doesn't make sense to want to eat a savory thing after you just finished your savory meal. But when desserts were like made en masse with sugar, what about sugar made us want that for our reward? Is sugar just that good?
That's a fair point, because if we say ate a cake for dinner and then had a cheeseburger for dessert, what exactly makes that so much different?
Mm-hmm. Like, say you don't like cake, but you love cheeseburgers, and that would be a dessert for you. It's like a reward. That makes sense to someone who would consider those foods either bad or good. But if you talk to like a child who will most certainly take cake over cheeseburger, it makes more sense for cake to be the dessert. Because the point of a dessert is like reward. You ate this meal, here's a little bit extra that tastes better in a smaller portion because it's less healthy, but here is your reward.
I guess a big part of it is I know almost everybody has a sweet tooth of some sort. So, they're really inclined to eat something sugary. Not necessarily even sugary, because something can be sweet without having much sugar in it, like artificial sweeteners, but that's another topic in itself. But along that same line, it's sort of like if someone chooses that they like this food more than this food, it really should be that they can choose whatever food they want to have as a reward for eating another food. So if someone loves cheeseburgers and loves pizza but hates, I don't know, mashed potatoes, they eat mashed potatoes for dinner and then they can have a cheeseburger pizza for dessert.
Perhaps. I suppose the idea isn't that food, like your meals, lunch, and dinner, shouldn't have to be something that you hate. It's just something that you wouldn't like. What is the difference between like food and dessert food? Because I would say, in terms of likability, I probably like cake about as much as I like pork. Like, it's good. It's not everything that most people like banging up to me. It's not the dessert. Just the same that pork is not the meat. But I would not be opposed to eating either for a meal. I don't hate either of them. So what is the difference between dessert and food? Because there are savory desserts too. There's like salty desserts. It's not a taste thing. It's not a likability thing. So what does separate a dessert from a meal?
The first thing that popped into mind when you asked that question was that dessert is something you would more easily divulge yourself in, I guess is the best way to put it. Because while you may divulge yourself in eating an entire pizza, because you get pizza, you're having pizza for dinner, normally you'd eat 2 or 3 slices, but then you decide you want to eat more, so you eat the whole pizza. You can divulge yourself in that pretty easily, but for, say, like a cheeseburger, normally you would only eat 1 cheeseburger. Maybe 2 if you're really hungry, but not really something you divulge yourself in. Whereas cakes, ice creams, donuts, most people could very easily eat like half a dozen donuts in 10 minutes.
I read something interesting on that. It seems to be a commonly agreed upon thing with like nutritionalists and food scientists that the reason we can eat so much more like ice cream or cookies is because it's processed. And because it's processed, our body literally doesn't know what we're eating. So you could eat like 8 ounces of steak or say like 3 pieces of pizza because it's not processed. It's cheese, it's bread, it's stuff that your food is used to eating, right? It knows what this is. This is definitely food. But if you take like a cookie or ice cream, something that has been processed, cereal even, your body doesn't know what this food is because it had to be like chemically broken down in the cooking process to turn it into from like wheat to cereal or from milk to ice cream. It's chemically different from food at that point. So our body doesn't have because our body will look at how much nutrients are in our stomach and like send the signal of whether we're full or not to our head off of that. But it literally doesn't know what's in our stomach, so it can't gauge how full we are. So we're literally eating way more than we think we are, and we are definitely full by all margins after eating maybe even like recommended servings, so like 2 Oreos. Maybe we genuinely are full after eating 2 Oreos, but we'll never tell because our body doesn't know what we just ate.
Right, and it doesn't know how to digest it because it's not something the body can digest on a normal basis.
Mm-hmm.
Given time, it will pick out like the sugars and I don't know, the grains from the bread. But when it's put in there, right when it's put in there, it's more of a, what is this? We can't digest this. This is foreign.
Mm-hmm. It's the same reason that like when someone says you want to feel full, go eat pasta, right? Go eat gluten because that's something our body recognizes. We've been eating gluten ever since we became like non-nomadic and started growing wheat and rye and barley and all that stuff. Like we've known what gluten is for like hundreds of thousands of years at this point. Our body is very familiar with the compound. So in terms of like ease of things to find, it's very easy to find pasta in your house or at a Chinese restaurant or even at like fast food restaurants. It's not very hard to find a gluten option, and that's what will make you full. If you were to eat like a hamburger, if you remove the buns, you're going to eat like 3 times as many hamburgers as if you had kept the buns on. That's why people get full off of hamburgers. It's usually the buns, the really thick hamburger buns or the hot dog buns on a hot dog. That's usually the thing that's making you so full. and why people say don't eat chips, don't eat snacks. If you're trying to like if you're hungry, don't eat those things because you aren't going to get full because your body doesn't know how to say you are full after eating it. You have to eat something that is like natural enough to where your body can recognize it as a food compound and hasn't had like its base chemical structure destroyed to make it food. It's nothing against like cookies, like they're good, but at their like chemical core, they are no longer food that our body recognizes, which could be a very adverse problem, but it's at least an issue for acknowledging whether or not we are or are not full.
It's interesting then because with stuff like burgers and hot dogs and all that, the bread is what makes you full. But it's really interesting that in a lot of cases people can eat a ton of pizza in one sitting, even though that is bread based as well. My best guess would be that it's mostly not bread. Like it's more toppings and cheese and sauce than it is bread. But there is still quite a bit of bread there, so it's interesting that that difference happens.
I think in that instance, it's because dough is more compact than bread, because bread is like fluffy and light most of the time. So you take like a hamburger bun, you can like crush it in your palm, and then it'll like expand back out. It's like full of air, basically. Pizza crust doesn't really do that. It's cooked. Like it's not baked, it's cooked. And I think that's the difference is that in the baking process, bread becomes light and fluffy and air filled, which fills up more of your stomach naturally. And bread dough, or pizza dough, I guess, is cooked in a way that it's basically its own like solid product. Yes, there's air pockets in it, but with the chewing that you have to do with it anyways, it basically gets ground into a pulp of solid mass. Whereas if you do that with bread, the small bread pieces are still going to expand with air because they have the space and the form to continue expanding.
Yeah, that's a fair point. This whole topic kind of begs an interesting question, though, of if given enough time, maybe our body will become used to all this processed garbage, and so we'll be able to easily digest, like, Oreos in 4052, and we'll be less easily able to digest bread.
Honestly, on the note of digestion, what is with cake icing? Because I've never been able to like quite understand because I've had icing on like cookies or donuts or even cupcakes, and that's fine. It's very sugary, so it's very hard for me to eat in large doses. But cake icing is always bad to me. It's always terrible. And it always makes my stomach hurt after I eat like even like a small piece that you might get at a birthday party out of a larger cake. Even those small squares that you might get off of a cake, they make my stomach hurt like hell. It's just, and I know it's the icing because I've had uniced cake and not do that to me. It's just something about that icing that just really doesn't work as a digestible thing.
I kind of get what you mean. I don't, this doesn't really apply to the digestion part of it, but a lot of cakes that I've had that have icing are sort of like grainy in texture, so it's not necessarily that they taste bad or they don't digest well, but it's just like it's a weird texture in the mouth, so it's kind of not revolting, but uh, diluted revolting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the word for it, but
Grainy is a good description of what it feels like in the mouth, but it definitely does not pass through you very well. It is not great.
yeah, I'm really not sure where that difference comes from because, like you said, eating cookies and even cupcakes with icing is just fine, but on the cupcake specifically, if you just make the cupcake bigger into a cake, it makes the icing worse somehow. I don't know if that's because they specifically use a different kind of icing for cake. I doubt it, but
I mean, it could be because if you like look at a cake, most often they use a type of frosting called fondant, which adheres to flat surfaces much better than like frosting, which is more like a whipped cream type consistency. Like you know what a cupcake looks like with frosting, with the little swirl. That holds much better with a whipped creamy frosting. So it gets its own special frosting for that and its own special method for being placed on it. Cake will have the same method only for the texture. So, like the outer rim, where it has the swirls on like most frosted cakes, that's done with the same method as cupcakes, with the same frosting as cupcakes. But the actual flat layer of frosting is usually just a base fondant, which is probably why it tastes so bad. Is that it's not really frosting in the same way that you'd think frosting is. It's like if you said that this salad was a salad, but it had like rather than lettuce and kale and like tomatoes, stuff you'd expect in a salad, it's like mowed grass, dandelions, like by definition, a salad. It's just not exactly the salad you're quite expecting.
Yeah, so it's more of like the fondant is kind of like a sticky paste rather than the frosting that we're used to. So that could be why it doesn't go down so well, is that it's sticky. Kind of like the way peanut butter is sticky, but not quite.
It's more meant for adherence than taste,
Yeah,
I suppose. Because they also have to question whether or not a design is being drawn on top of said cake,
it's
like
also a good
a
point.
happy birthday line, or if it's like a stylized character cake, like you need to make sure that that uh like gel stays on or that frosting stays on. You need to make sure the graphics stay on. And that's why those types of cakes that have like definitive like character imprints, like a child's Mickey Mouse birthday cake, those ones always taste the worst of all cakes because it's there for design purposes more than taste. Yes, it's edible. It's like a sugary film, but it's still not good.
I do find that kind of funny how we, in like that sense, we make food look good, even though we're using stuff that will make it taste bad, just for the sake of making it look good. So it's kind of interesting that we prioritize. Oh, hey, that looks really cool, rather than that tastes really good. Considering taste is the more, I guess, permanent of it, because we can look at the cake for like 3 minutes before we eat it, but the taste will probably linger for several minutes.
Right. On the note of a presentation being better than how something tastes, pies for a new dessert. I think pies as a concept look amazing. They are like a pastry baked type dessert that are filled with a filling and a crust. It feels like a jelly filled donut in that sense, but like properly fleshed out, as if like the jelly filled donut was a prelude like beta test, and the pie is how it's actually meant to be. In practice, I've never had a pie I've ever liked, ever. They all suck. And that's not just like me sitting here and having one bad pie and just crapping on all other pies. I've had a very large assortment of pies. I've had apple pies and cherry pies. I've had chocolate, like those chocolate cream pies. So it's not even just fruit based. I've had a couple of pumpkin pies. They just don't work. I don't know what it is, but they look so promising. They look like they should be good. They have the setup to look perfect and the setup to taste perfect, and they fumble it so hard, and I don't know why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of agree with you there. I've had pies that I like, but I have had a lot of pies that I don't like either. And that is largely because the filling is something I don't like. Like, for example, I've had pecan pie, and I don't like that. But apple pie, pumpkin pie, I've had cherry pie once or twice. I like those because I like those fruit flavors.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't really know because it's interesting that it's so deceptive. Like you said, pie looks so good, but then once you taste it, it's just not what it looks like it should be. And even though I like pie, I still agree that it looks a lot better than it tastes.
Mm-hmm. It's just like if you have a fruit-based cake, say, like a strawberry cake. Those, I don't like fruit-based desserts, but those tend to fare better, in my opinion, than fruit-based pies of the same caliber. And I think it may be more because you're not getting an overwhelming presence of it. Because the point of a pie is that you have a top layer of crust, a side layer of crust from the outer edge, and then you have a bottom layer of crust. And in between that bottom layer and that top layer, nothing but whatever flavor that pie is. It's just nothing but apple pieces or pumpkin pieces or pecan pieces. It's just one of those things. So to eat a pie is to eat a big mouthful of nothing but that fruit, essentially. It's the same issue I have with like pot pies, pies in general, but like pot pies, you have a meat, you have a gravy, you have some vegetables. The crust usually tastes terrible and is only there to contain the actual food. So at that point, I wonder what's the point of adding the crust? If it tastes terrible and it's only there as a container, why not just use a bowl? Same as a pie. At what point do you just look at the crust and see how little it's adding to the food and be like, I'd rather just eat a bowl of like cooked apples because that is dessert. There are many places that do like baked apples or like roasted cherries as desserts, fruits in general. But what's the point of a pie crust other than just to contain it? And I've never had a crust that wasn't super like ironically crusty and like dry. It's just not serving much. Maybe it's meant to be like a grounding agent where the inside filling is very sweet and the crust is very not.
I mean, on that note, I'm not too sure because I feel like, at least in the case of pot pies, the crust helps it cook better. I guess microwave better. You can oven bake them, but I think it helps them cook better because it contains the heat, so it can spread better throughout all the meat and the vegetables and whatnot. But on the note of pot pies, I didn't even think about pot pies when we were talking about pies to begin with because I don't know. I guess I just didn't think about them, but probably because I'm thinking of pie as dessert rather than less of a dessert. But I like pot pies. Pot pies are one of my more favorite pies, and I have always had pot pies that the crust tastes good, so it's kind of hard to follow up the conversation with you talking about the crust tasting like garbage because I've had them taste good, but
it's just that maybe it tastes good to some people, but there's so little of it. Like the film of crust on the top and bottom is maybe a millimeter thick, and the sides are not any thicker. So if you have a standard pot pie, maybe the size of your fist, maybe a quarter of a bite is actually crust, and then you have another quarter of the like outer rim of crust, which is like almost always completely brittle and dry. I don't know. It just there doesn't feel like because you can have like a film over a bowl, like those microwave dinners. You can do that, and it'll cook throughout the gravy just as well as the pot pie film.
that's a good point.
So if you can do that, then the crust must be there for a culinary purpose. But I just don't see much culinary use in it.
Yeah, I'm not too sure either because again, the pot pies I've had, the crust has actually been like substantial. Not exactly like an inch of crust, but like half a centimeter, maybe a bit more. So like an actual decent amount. And I'm sure I'm definitely not the only one to do this, but the way I eat pot pies is I like kind of scoop the pie out of the bowl thing that it's in and flip it over and then crush the bread and then mix it all together with the insides. So that for each bite I'm getting meat, vegetables, gravy, and crust rather than some of the bites being crust over the top or on the bottom and then other bites just being the insides.
Just off of speed, I usually eat it straight out of the bowl, which I find helps make it less dry because I can do kind of as you said and fold the entire pie in on itself and let the side dry pieces kind of melt into the gravy, get some type of flavoring on them.
That makes some sense. I was
It's not
also
going to
going to
moisturize
mention
them, but
Yeah, I was also going to mention that the gravy kind of helps with the bread too, because while it may not moisturize it, it does at least add the flavor to the crust.
I don't like foods where it's required to do a step or add a thing. Like if you have a hamburger and it's just so dry that you have to add mustard or ketchup or I don't think that's a good burger. Even if you enjoy ketchup and mustard on a burger, if you feel like you are forced to do it, it doesn't feel like good food. And that's another reason I don't like pies too much is because for me to properly like enjoy a pie, most pies have to have like an add-on. Like the very famous one of pumpkin and whipped cream. I'd never have enjoyed a pumpkin pie just straight up.
I was going to say just burying it in whipped cream.
You gotta like put a really heavy dollop of whipped cream on it to like make it work.
You
Apple
fill
pie.
your mouth with whipped cream, and then you take a small piece of pumpkin pie and put that in your mouth.
Mm-hmm. Like it's also very popular with apple pies, Dutch apple specifically, I believe, to have it served with a scoop of vanilla ice cream.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I've had that, and it's much better than just a base apple pie. But can you think about that in terms of other desserts? Like, do cakes taste so bad that you have to, like, not bad, but like so not right? Like, they have to be, like, substantiated by an additional food item. Because at birthdays, you'll have, like, a thing of, like cake and a thing of ice cream, but you don't have to get ice cream or you don't have to get cake with your ice cream. You can eat them each separately.
I was just gonna say cake and ice cream's a pretty big combo.
They're good for a combo, but you definitely can eat them like separately and not even think about the other one.
Yeah,
I've
for
never
sure.
eaten a cake by itself and been like, you know what this needs? A scoop of chocolate ice cream. I have eaten many a pie and been like, I really wish I had, say, whipped cream or a scoop of ice cream or even a drink. Like, I just wish that there was something else with me to make the experience better. And if I have to do that for a food, I just don't think it stands out very well.
Yeah, even on that, like I like pumpkin pie, sort of. I like it with whipped cream, quite a bit of whipped cream. If I don't have whipped cream, I think pumpkin pie is okay. Like I'll eat it, I won't hate it, but it's not exactly my go-to. But if I can put 10 pounds of whipped cream on it, hell yeah, I'm gonna take pumpkin pie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. On that note, though, I feel like it's sort of in the similar vein with the breadiness and the pastry sort of idea, but baklava is a Turkish, originally Turkish dessert, and it's a couple layers of pastry with some like nuts mixed throughout it and like a syrupy kind of glaze. So it's almost like a granola bar, but a completely different composition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really sweet tasting thing, which is kind of interesting because the nuts are in there, and nuts are very not sweet for the most part. But yeah, it's a very sweet dessert, and it's popular. It was made in Turkey, and then it was very popularized in a lot of other places.
I've never heard of it. Baklava?
Baklava, yeah.
And so you say it's just like a pastry of a sort?
Yeah, it's sort of like it'd be different depending on the family, but do you know what a 7-layer bar is?
No.
Okay, well, it's 7-layer bars are kind of like the base is like some sort of dough or pastry or bread, and then you add like whatever you want to it. Like it could be nuts, could be marshmallow cream, chocolate. Like you can add all sorts of stuff to it. And
So it's like a 7-layer cake, but you get to choose what ingredients in what order?
yes, and also it's not as soft as a cake.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's soft that it's not crunchy, but it's not soft.
But you have it in like cubes or bars.
Yes.
Okay. Never heard of it, but it sounds intriguing enough.
I've never actually had baklava myself. The way I found out about it was through Dying Light. It's one of the little snacks you can pick up to restore some of your health.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that and I was like, oh, baklava, that's kind of interesting. And so I looked into it back then and found that it's kind of a granola bar pastry dessert thing. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. So if I can find somewhere that serves it as like a actual restaurant type dish, I will definitely try it out at some point.
Mm-hmm. You said it's from Turkey originally?
Yeah.
Well, on a turkey idea, You ever have a dessert that just doesn't feel like a dessert?
A couple of times, yeah.
Well, in America, dessert, like we've discussed, is more often than not a sweet thing.
Right.
Well, there's a dessert also originally from Turkey called tavuk gogsu, which is essentially like it has a bunch of like standard things for a dessert. It's made of, I think, milk, rice flour, cinnamon, sugar. You know, standard stuff that you might find in like a donut,
Yeah,
right?
makes sense.
But it's also made with shredded chicken breast, which is exactly what tavuk gogsu means. It means chicken breast in Turkish.
Interesting.
It's made with shredded chicken breast, and I think the only complaint I had upon like figuring this out is why is it that one of the most popular desserts from Turkey uses shredded chicken? Don't you think they'd use shredded turkey?
I mean, yeah, maybe because it's specifically colloquial, they don't like turkey in Turkey. But also, I don't know much about it. Maybe there's not turkey in Turkey.
Turkey live all around the world. I'm sure that you could probably hunt turkey as far out as the Middle East, where turkey is around.
Yeah, more than likely.
You certainly can find them very often around here in the states.
Yeah, definitely. Like literally, just this last Thanksgiving, my brother down in Pennsylvania hunted a turkey for their Thanksgiving dinner,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting because the place they live at is very wild, like
Hmm.
wilderness based. They get bears around there, all kinds of raccoons and beavers and turkeys and deer, all this stuff. It's kind of interesting.
Hmm.
It's funny too because I heard a little story about one day my brother was just sitting out on the porch and there was a bear. Like he was just looking around and then he looked to his left and there was a bear just standing there like 10 feet away from him. So he was just like, oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. It reminds me of that one time that I was living with my mother when I was young, and we had a dumpster out by the road, and I was throwing away trash at like 2 a.m. because I was a night owl, so I always did all my chores in like the midst of night. And I opened the trash can, or I opened the dumpster, and a giant shadow just jumped out of the dumpster, and I fell back and like slammed into the driveway because it was right next to it. And I looked up and I couldn't see anything, and I'm just like, what the hell? For a second, I thought it was like a human person that left out because it was just such a big like thing. I still have no idea what jumped out of the dumpster. My best guess at this point is it genuinely was a human being just like rooting through our trash, or it was like a smaller size like bear, but I don't know cuz it I don't want to think it was a bear because I feel like a bear would have made itself more known. But bears, at least the bears we have here in New York, are usually very skittish because they're black bears. We don't have like very many grizzly bears, brown bears. Most of our bears are black bears, and they're like the size of a medium sized dog at best. Like, they aren't super big when they're actually on all fours. They can stand up at like average human height, sometimes a little bigger, but they're definitely not the size you would think of when you think bear. So, and if you like catch them off guard, they will run rather than fight you.
I was gonna say, since you were young, maybe your perspective made it like maybe it was a bear cub and the mama was like nearby, like observing. But I'm not too sure about that because I feel like if you were that close to it, the mama would have stepped in if she was close by. So,
That's my thought too. And especially the thing was the dumpster was closed. Like it wasn't like a raccoon just jumped in while it was open. Like something opened it and then shut it. Because it was one of those dumpsters that doesn't have one of the back overhangs for like trolley pushing, which means if you open one side of the dumpster, it falls all the way to the back, meaning something has to actively grab the lid again and pull it closed. So something was like trying to just be in there.
I guess it could have been that it like nosed its way under the panel and kind of slid in, and then it just closed because it wasn't all the way over. But
It could, but for the size of what jumped out, it doesn't feel likely. It feels like it would have just opened off of that. But yeah, that was an experience from my childhood.
yeah, I
Still no
bet.
idea what that was, but I didn't get a good look and it was gone before I could even like sit up and look cuz it was right next to a line of woods. So, for all I know, I met Matt the crazy man eating out of my trash and lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe it was just some random homeless person, or not even homeless person, just a random, what's the word? Junkie? Yeah, that's the word. Just a random junkie.
Maybe.
It's interesting though, because going back to the turkey chicken breast thing, is it still a sweet dessert?
It is. It's apparently like served as like a puddingy sweet dessert. The shredded chicken is supposedly so finely shredded that you can't get any texture out of it and you don't get taste out of it. It's purely there for the dessert to have an additional boost of protein in it. So it's not a solely sweet and damaging dessert to your system. It's like the same way that someone might eat like a chocolate covered protein bar in America. It's essentially the same concept of yes, it's a dessert, but it's like giving me nutrients or protein, or it's giving me more than just satisfaction.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was gonna mention like chocolate covered protein bars or even chocolate covered pretzels, because pretzels aren't exactly like nutritious, but they're not as bad as sour cream and onion potato chips.
Hmm.
So that's kind of in the similar vein.
Yeah, I would say that it's an interesting idea for a dessert. I don't know if I would ever actively try it, but I can understand the concept behind it.
Presented the opportunity, I would definitely try it. I wouldn't go seek it out. No way. But if I happen to be at a restaurant and they say, "Oh, we're serving this thing. Would you like to try it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Hmm.
Because if you can't taste the chicken and it's just like a pudding, then it should be fine.
I mean, there's nothing necessarily in it that I don't want. It's just more, I'm not big on dessert in the first place.
Which makes sense.
Why the hell did we host this episode if I don't even care?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess because you not caring and me caring provides good conversation.
I suppose. When's the last dessert I even ate? When's the last dessert you ate?
Uh, in terms of like a dessert, uh, long time ago.
Oh, you love dessert so much.
Well, we don't have desserts per se here at college. The best we've got is like cookies served at the terrace,
I mean,
which is a dessert, but it's not the kind of dessert I'm thinking of.
mm,
I mean, like if you go to a restaurant and you get their triple layer chocolate fudge mousse cake, that sort of thing.
I hate that. Both because it sounds so chocolatey that it's like damaging to my system, and additionally, why would we call it mousse?
Yeah, I don't know, because obviously it's spelled different than the animal, but I don't know.
I have a cousin who literally thought that any dessert having moose was just like the same as deer because his father hunted deer and it was a meat they had in the house constantly. So when they first had moose, they're like, "You finally took down a moose, Dad?" And he's like, "What?"
It's funny too, because the little side story is when my brother was really young before I was born, or maybe when I was an infant, I'm not too sure, but when my brother was young, he had a phase where he refused to eat anything unless it was venison. So my mom and my dad and even my sister sometimes would have to say, they'd give him food and he'd be like, "What is this?" And they'd be like, "Oh, it's venison," even though it's like a PB&J sandwich. And he's just
Mm.
like, "Oh, okay, venison," and he eats it and he's just like, "Huh, I don't think this is venison, but they said it's venison, so I guess it's fine."
I like your wording of had a phase as if this is a common occurrence of children. You know, he's just going through that phase where he eats nothing but venison.
I mean, you never know.
I mean, no, I don't, but I'm pretty sure when I went through my dark and troubled phase as a teen, I wasn't trying to eat nothing but deer. pretty sure I skipped that phase.
Yeah, I more meant it as like a phase of like a sequence or a what's the other word for sequence? Uh,
Instructions.
no.
Is this just like a step by step how to be Tim's brother? Step 32, eat nothing but venison for like 5 years?
No, it's like sequence, story, event, uh, timeline, time period. A point in time that he would only eat venison.
Mm-hmm.
Like for a period of his life, he refused to eat anything unless it was venison.
Can't relate.
I can't say I can't say I've ever gone through a phase, a sequence where I only want to eat venison, but I have eaten venison plenty of times, and it's one of my more favorite meats.
I don't know. It kind of tastes like somewhere in between chicken and pork to me. So it's like between those because chicken is very low on my scale of meat, and pork is probably like the most medium of mediums. So it's probably like in terms of those meats, somewhere in between it, probably closer to pork. I
So
haven't
more of a
had
medium rare than a rare.
I haven't had venison enough, and I haven't had like good venison. I haven't had bad venison as a comparison, but that's probably how my list kind of like fluctuates. I've had a lot of bad chicken, very few good chicken. I've had a lot of good pork, very often I also have bad pork, so it's kind of the middle range. And venison, I've had some good, but not enough to like surpass pork. I've definitely had more good venison than bad venison, but definitely not enough for a good comparison.
Yeah, it's just not enough of a sample size.
Well, because most of the venison I've eaten hasn't been like venison steak or like an actual like cut of venison. It's been like meshed in with like a pasta. So like I
Yeah,
don't know.
ground venison is the majority of the venison I've eaten too.
Hmm.
I don't think I actually have had like a venison cutlet, but
I'd like to actually taste the meat for what it is rather than like the pasta sauce or whatever else is melded in. It's like a staple in my grandmother's goulash back when my grandfather was alive and went hunting. He would often bring back big deer and they'd have venison for years. And she'd just make goulash with like one it's like 1 part beef, 2 part venison, both ground, and yeah, it was good, but it was really hard to distinguish what was beef and what was venison when both of it's ground, so it's the same texture, and you're not really tasting either of them because it's in goulash.
right, because it's sort of like if you can taste, say you have two steaks in front of you, one of them's beef, one of them's venison. You don't know which one is which, and you've never had venison. If you were to just eat both of them, you could probably tell the difference between, like you could say this one is beef and this one is definitely not beef, but you wouldn't exactly be able to say, yeah, this is definitely venison because you don't know what it tastes like,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of what I'm getting at with what you said because you said most, even all of the venison you've tasted has been in something.
Mm-hmm.
The same goes for me. All of my venison, I'm pretty sure, has been ground venison. I had venison jerky once, but that's different for a different reason. But for some reason, I feel like I've had some sort of venison dish where I can actually taste the meat. Because I can distinctively say, like, if you were to give me something venison, I could distinctively say, yeah, this is venison. Because I know I've had something that allowed me to actually taste venison for what it is, but I don't know what it was.
Well, let's just cut that and say let's both swear to for our next outing have some venison chops as dessert.
Yeah, I'd say that's good.
All right.
It's about 40 minutes.
Mm. You want to record like an outro for it, or
I was gonna just delve into the other dessert that I had real quick.
all right, and then just rearrange it later?
Yeah. Would the venison and all that be like an outtake, or Would it just kind of be like a side tangent that's put in the episode?
You're the editor.
Yeah, true. So let's see. Last thing we talked about was your chicken breast thing.
Mm.
Pudding. This is kind of a pudding, so. Not really, actually. Well, I mean, yes, but no. Because it's dulce de leche, but this specific example is dulce de leche ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the base thing is kind of a pudding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, on the similar note of pudding, because that's what you were just talking about, it's a pudding-like dish. Dulce de leche is a very popular dessert type item in a lot of Hispanic type countries and nations.
What does that mean? Cheese of milk?
Sweet from milk. It's basically they took milk and they cooked it in a specific way. Like they basically simmered it at like a very low heat until it became sort of like a paste, and it was really sweet. So like evaporating all the water that's in milk, just leaving behind the sugars and the whatever else, and that kind of caramelizes into a crackly kind of paste thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very often spread across like toast and cookies and all that.
So it itself is usually not the dessert. It's just like a dessert option, and much a way a chocolate spread would be a dessert option.
Usually, yes, but you can intermix it with certain things to make it like dulce de leche flavored,
For example,
like dulce de leche ice cream. You can use the caramelized milk as the base, and then obviously add in like some cream to get the actual texture for it. But the main taste will be the dulce de leche.
right. Makes sense.
It's nice too because I actually have some experience with it. In my Spanish class in ninth grade, my teacher a few different times made food for us, just because it was like kind of off days where we didn't have anything to talk about in the lesson because we got through it faster than she expected or something like that. One time she made like just basic cheese quesadillas. One time she did something else I don't remember, but one or two times she did dulce de leche, and it was really good.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can also just eat it as the paste that it is.
Right.
It's like it'd be sort of like eating peanut butter. Like a lot of people do it. It is sensible enough.
Mm-hmm. My Spanish teacher only made one thing with us. He made paella once.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
He was from what's the one country in South America that starts with P, I think.
Peru.
Peru, yes. It was on the tip of my tongue. But yes, he's from Peru. So he basically traveled all the way up to America from Peru. Not as like he walked there or anything, but he came over here for high school, I believe, went back to Peru for college, and then like kind of just toured around South America. So he has like a large palate, and one of his favorite foods was paella, and he wanted to share it with the class when we got to like food and connoisseurship and restaurant topics.
That makes a lot of sense. I've heard a lot of good things about paella, and I've always wanted to try it.
The only thing I ever heard about paella prior to that instance was that it's usually made in a large pan called a wok. You basically just like simmer everything together.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like a what's the word? Hot pot.
More or less, yeah. It's really just cooking all of it together, and it makes it a very like low effort dish, but it usually comes out fairly well. I didn't partake in trying it, but a lot of my classmates did, and they all had pretty high reviews of it.
Yeah, sounds right.
I don't even remember what type of paella he made. I think it was a chicken one. I don't think he was going to do something as risky as a seafood one.
Yeah.
Because that has a higher chance of being not allowed by school standards, but...
That plus a lot of more people find chicken palatable than fish, seafood.
Me included.
Yes. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up for our dessert talk.
Did we even talk about desserts? I feel like we talked about chicken the whole time.
I mean, that was definitely like 20 minutes worth, but yeah, we talked about cakes for like 20-25 minutes.
Oh, yeah, cakes. Well, next time we'll have to make sure to focus a little bit more on cakes because there was so much about cakes that I didn't even get to touch upon.
Yeah,
Like cheesecake. Is it a cake? Is it good? Everyone tells me it is, but it doesn't sound good.
I was gonna mention cheesecake too, because it's also one of my favorite types of cake.
Everyone always talks about how many types of cheesecake there are, but like, is it good? Why is it good? Because you're telling me you put cheese on this cake?
Yeah, it definitely sounds a lot worse than it tastes.
It sounds way worse. I'll bet.
It's sort of like the way cheesecake, or like how cheese is a dairy product. So like if you do it in a different way, you can make milk into butter or cheese or cream or whatever. So it's more like the cheese is a cream than actual cheese.
So it's like cream cake.
Sort of, yeah.
That still doesn't sound super palatable, but I suppose it sounds more palatable than cheesecake.
Yeah, because I guess it's sort of the same way of that pudding from Turkey, in that the chicken is made in a way that, or put into it in a way that makes it not taste. Because I'm pretty sure it is cream cheese that is used in cheesecake, at least for the most part.
Well, I wasn't expecting to bite into cheesecake and find just a mouthful of mozzarella,
Well,
but
yeah, but
if I find mozzarella in my cake, someone's going to have their head roll down a hill.
but yeah, with it being cream cheese is less of a, I don't know if savory is the word for cheese, but I'm just gonna go with it. It's less savory than your standard cheese, but it's not sweet either. But because it is cream cheese, you can manipulate it in a way that will make it sweet, or at least sweet foundation. So it can be built off of with chocolates or lemon meringue or whatever.
Well, see you guys next time. I'm ending the episode before we get too in depth about cheesecake.
Yeah, as we were already starting the outro, we should do the outro. So again, that covers it for dessert. Hope you'll tune in next time. Bye.
Bye.